Hey, what's going on, everybody? Back with another how-to. Today we're going to be doing the outer tie rod ends on this 2014 Nissan Altima. Now this should fall in line with any 5th gen Altima, which is 2013 to 2018. So let's get into it now. Alright guys, so I'm here on the driver's side. Now the reason that we're doing the outer tie rod ends is we just put new Pirelli tires on the car, so it's going to need an alignment. And on top of that, the driver's side tie rod boot is ripped. So due to that, I'm going to replace both outer tie rod ends, and we have the tires here replaced, brand new tires, and we're going to get an alignment with the new tie rod end. So that is why I'm doing it. Although if you are having suspicions that you have bad tie rod ends, inner or outer, what you can do is first come to the wheel with both of the front wheels in the air. So if you want to learn how to get this on jack stands, I do have a video on getting the 5th gen Altima safely on jack stands. So as you can see, I have the jack here for extra support along with the jack stand. So I have the whole front up in the air. Both the front passenger and driver are in the air. So I'm here on the driver's side, and one way you can check and see if you actually have an issue with your tie rods is you can take your hands, put them on 3 and 9 o'clock, and you want to shake the wheel a bit. All right, so I'm having no play. If you're seeing the camera move, it's actually me moving because I have it sitting on me. But the camera's moving, not the wheel, but I'm shaking this and this has no play. I also did that on the other side as well. And just because you have a ripped boot doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually showing signs of defectiveness and, actually giving you a sound or issue. Or it might not even be, frozen up or anything. It still might be functioning fine. It's just if you have a ripped tie rod boot, it's probably going to prematurely fail and get to the point where it's going to rust, lock up, and then not function as it should. So that's why we are replacing it. But like I said, take your hands on 3 and 9, shake the wheel. You should have no play. Now you can turn the wheel. See, I'm turning the wheel. It's not an issue. So I should be able to turn the wheel. It's just you shouldn't have any shakiness. So, if I take my hands and put it in the wheel tread right here, if I shake it, I have no play. And you want to make sure that it is the tie rods, even if you do have play, because if I took the wheel and shook it right here and it moved, it could be even a bad wheel bearing. So you just got to eliminate, or ball joint. So you just got to eliminate what it is by looking when you have a sound, movement, or anything in the front end. So I have no play or movement on either side. I've already checked, but like I showed you guys, you need to see if you have any play. And if you have any play, I'm going to show you where to look on the car underneath while it's being moved so you can eliminate and exactly determine what is your issue. So if you're at 3 and 9, shaking the wheel, you can first determine you have an issue. So you can take your hands, put it at 3 and 9, shake the wheel like we just did. If you have play, have a friend, spouse, whatever, come out, do the same thing. And while they're shaking that at 3 and 9, you need to get under the car and look from behind and see what is actually moving or has play in the suspension components or steering. So as you saw, there was nothing moving. So I'm going to go under the car and I'm going to show you exactly what you should be looking for. All right, guys, so I'm under the car. I have you here on the driver's side that we were just in front of. So if you or you had somebody shaking the wheel at 3 and 9, as you can see, this has no play. I'm moving the wheel. You can see there's no play in our tie rod, no play in our ball joint. The wheel's not moving, so the wheel bearing is good. The hub assembly is okay. So that is what you want to be looking for. Now, if we look, if somebody was shaking this on the other side, we would be looking right here at the ball joint. So if I was moving this and I saw this had a lot of play and rocking back and forth, we'd have a bad ball joint, so you would need a control arm. Or if I was moving this and you saw this coming out or not doing anything, or if I was shaking the wheel and we saw a ton of play or movement in this outer tie rod end, you would know you would need an outer tie rod end. As you can see, here is our rip boot that I was mentioning. So this is actually pretty tight still. It actually still moves, feels good. So this isn't technically failing, I guess you could say yet. It's just the boot is failing. So we're not getting a sound or issue coming from this tie rod end. It's just because of the condition of it, it needs to be replaced. Now you have your inner tie rods here. So starting here at this jam nut to here, to the boot, is the outer tie rod end, and then from here into the rack of pinion, if you look in there, that is the boot for the rack of pinion. That is the inner tie rod. So if we look at the inner tie rod, let's see if I can move the camera for you guys here. This has no play either. It's not making noises. And if somebody was shaking this and I was holding it and it stopped the sound or clunking, or it gave it no more play, then we would know this inner tie rod's bad. So I tested the inner tie rod on both sides. The inner tie rods are good. If you wanted to, you could always replace it, while you're doing the outers. But in my opinion, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, these seem tight. I'm going to leave them alone. We're just going to be doing the outers, and that is our main reason why. And we got to get it alignment anyway, so why not get these knocked out? So there's some things to look for and how to determine if you got bad tie rod ends, just some things to consider. There are other variables as well. Could be sway bar end links if you got a front end noise, axle. These are all things you need to look for. But if I'm looking at this front end, axle boots are good, the axle's tight, everything is tight. It's got new control arms on it, so the boot and everything is good. The only issue we have is that torn boot. So make sure when you have a front end noise, you're actually resolving the front end noise, and you're troubleshooting and diagnosing by determining what actually is failing by getting under the car, looking, seeing what's cracked boots, ripped, broken, has play, all of the above. So just a few ways you can look and see what you got going on. And like I said, there are other variables, but these are some things you can consider in order to determine what your problem is. So we're going to go ahead and get into this now. We're going to replace this outer tie rod end. All right, guys, so on the driver's side here, we're going to go ahead and take the wheel off first, of course. So the lug nuts are 21 mil. Have a 21 mil on my impact. Just going to sneak in here and fire all 5 of these right out. All right, so we have the wheel off here, got all 5 21 mils out. So as you can see, here is our outer tie rod. Might be hard to see, but like I showed you, that boot is damaged, and that is the main reason we're replacing these, and we're going to get it alignment. So doing tie rods prior to an alignment, of course, is a great idea, because once you replace your tie rods or mess with them, it's really needs an alignment, or at least needs to be touched up and made sure that it's in spec. So one thing we're going to do before we start getting this off and replaced is I like to count the threads of the tie rod to get an idea of where we're at, and it'll give you a good rough guesstimate of where this is at prior to you taking it off, so you don't have this in the wrong spot and have crazy play in your steering and actually have this way off. So this is the easiest way to get it back into spec. So what I have is a little pick here, and what we're going to do is count the threads. And one thing I like to do, I'll even take my phone and take a picture of this with the light on it, so I have double the reference of what this is supposed to be and how many threads it's going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right here with this first thread. I'm just going to take the pick. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So about 14 to 15 is the thread count on this. So that's where it's at prior. This is where it was in spec at. That's where we need to get it back close to. You're probably not going to get it exactly where this is, but you can probably get it pretty close, and who knows, you might even get it exact. So that's where we need to be when we thread this off, is we need to get it right back into 14 and 15 threads, and that way we'll know exactly where we need to be, and it puts us in a good spec prior to getting the alignment to ensure it's perfect. So just go ahead and count your threads, and then it'll give you a good idea, and then from there we can go ahead and get this thing off. So the first thing we're going to do in order to get this off and replaced is we're going to break loose the jam nut. The jam nut is the nut that holds it to the inner tie rod right there. So that right there, that is a 22 mil. Now it's a good chance that thing is going to be on there. Unless it's been taken off recently or prior or anything of that nature. If it's the original, it's probably going to be on there. So you're going to need a big 22 mil wrench. And what I like to do, especially with ones that have been on there as long as this one has, because this is the OE original that's been on here for 7-8 years and also has 177,000 miles on it. So what I'm going to do is take a torch, a little propane torch, and I'm just going to lightly heat that up for a few seconds just to get it going, so it'll be easier to remove. Heat always is a great persuader to get bolts and nuts and things like that to crack loose. So I'm just going to lightly heat that up, and then I'm going to break that thing loose. Alright guys, so here we go. I'm just lightly heating it up. Try to keep it away from anything that can
cause damage like wiring or rubber. And on the other side, I tried to do it without heating it up and it wasn't budging. So I heated it up for about 30 seconds and then it came free. So you don't necessarily need to do this, but it does make it a lot easier if you give it a little bit of heat prior, it'll just break right loose. So I'm gonna heat this up for another 10-15 seconds and then we'll go ahead and get this thing off. All right, so I got that 22 mil jam nut heated up, so we're gonna go ahead and break that loose, and this works just as a regular bolt or nut would. It is righty-tighty, lefty-loosey if you're facing it that way. So since we are on the driver's side, if I'm facing it, you know, frontwards, I'm going to be turning it to the right, but if we were coming from this side, it's going to be your left. So I got my 22 mil wrench here. It's a pretty big wrench, and I should be able to break that thing loose. Now the tie rod's going to move a bit when you do this because it has play, but there we go. Broke that thing right loose, no effort, and that was because we did the heat. That thing came right loose. So, and you can see I didn't even heat it up enough that I'm touching this with some rubber gloves and it's not even burning me. So we didn't burn it and torch it till the thing was about to catch on fire. Everything is fine, you know, just a little bit of heat, and that should be more than enough to get that thing easily to crack loose. So I'm going to turn it back almost flush, and that's going to help us keep an idea of where we need to be at when we put the new one on and thread it on. So I have it pretty much right up against this, so when I take the old tie rod end off, I got a good idea of where this is going to be. So that's a good place to keep it, is once you break it loose, tighten it back up almost till it's touching, so you got a good idea of where it's supposed to be. All right, so now that we have the jam nut broken loose, we got it in place. The next thing we're going to do is come under here to the steering knuckle where the tie rod meets the steering knuckle, okay? And you can see we have our 19 mil nut here, and we have a cotter pin. So we're going to have to remove that cotter pin first, and then from there we could go ahead and get that nut off. So let's go ahead and get that cotter pin out. All right guys, so here is our cotter pin. As you can see, it's bent to prevent that nut from backing off. So what we need to do is bend it back into shape almost and get it to come out. So what I have is some snips here. I'm going to bend this thing pretty much straight, and then I'm going to just try to pull it out and work it out of the hole through the tie rod end, and we should be able to get that thing on out. So let's go ahead and bend this thing and get this cotter pin out. All right, pretty much bending them straight. You can even do this a little bit with your hand. Not crazy strong or in there. At least usually they're not. There you go, almost out guys. This thing has fought me pretty well. The other one I got out in about 10 seconds, and this one is pretty well bent in here. So there we go, got it out one piece. But you might have to fight with it a little bit, bend it, you know, from the rear and the front and get it to play its way on out of there. But we got it out, so now we can go ahead and remove this 19 mil nut. All right, so this is a 19 mil right here on the bottom of the tie rod. So I got a 19 on an impact. I'm just going to fire this right off. There it is. And I'm actually going to leave it about right there. So I'm going to separate this now that we have this nut broken loose. We're going to separate the tie rod from the steering knuckle. And usually you want to keep this on there so when you separate it, it doesn't go flying, the arm doesn't come out, and you just have a little bit of protection here at the bottom to keep that in the knuckle when you separate it, and it'll make it a little bit easier on you. So there we go, we got this thing cracked loose, cotter pin off. So now what we have to do is get this tie rod out of the steering knuckle. So as you can see, it's just not going to pull out. So what we're going to do is utilize a ball joint separator, and we're going to go ahead and get this thing out. All right guys, so we're going to go ahead and separate the tie rod from the knuckle. And what I have here is just a long ball joint separator, pickle fork, separator fork, whatever you want to call it. And there is multiple different ways you can get this apart. Some people like hitting it on the side with a hammer. Sometimes you can create enough pressure that it'll pop out. You can almost use like a tie rod Pitman arm separator, which comes in and it hooks on here, and you can turn it and it'll push the stud from the bottom of the tie rod out. I actually have one of those, and it doesn't fit well on the steering knuckle setup. So what the factory service manual recommends is to use a ball joint separator, and this is the style one that they recommend using. Although we can use this fork, as I did on the other side successfully already, and get it off. So yes, there is multiple ways to get this off. This is the method I'm choosing to do it, and that is the style ball joint separator that the factory service manual from Nissan recommends. So they do recommend using a ball joint separator. I'm going to be using this fork, and that's how we're going to get it off. So if we look at this fork, it has a flat end. See how this one curves down like a ramp? The bottom's flat.
The flat is going to go onto the knuckle side. And what we're going to do is slowly hammer this into here, and as it goes in, it's going to pop this out and separate the actual tie rod end from the knuckle. So you do want to be careful when doing this. You want to find a good spot that you're not going to chew up the knuckle itself or the tie rod, especially if you're trying to separate these and not damage it. It's going to be really hard with one of these forks. They do tend to put a lot of stress and pressure on the boots, especially if they're older, so keep that in mind. But what we're going to do is go ahead and get this thing worked in. I have this hammer right here, so I'm just going to be hitting the end of the hammer lightly to kind of guide this in and create that pressure we need to separate this tie rod. So let's go ahead and get it done. As you can see, I have a decent angle, probably the best angle I'm going to get on this tie rod end without chewing everything up. So just keep in mind where you're at. And there we go, got it seated. And now I'm just going to go ahead and work this thing in. There we go. Oh my God. I had to get this thing all the way in. The other one popped out a lot easier than this one for some reason. I don't know why, but this one definitely had some more to be desired there. So, so now that that's loose, you go ahead and remove that 19 mil in its entirety. Yep. Just keep in mind you got a washer and a nut. And then if you play with this, it should just come right out. All right, so there we go. Got a ton of grease on the knuckle there, as you can see, and that is from the boot being bad. So we got that off, guys, fully removed, and we could go ahead and get into getting this thing threaded off. All right, guys, so I got the ball joint separator off of the bottom of the actual tie rod, and like I mentioned, we're going to leave that jam nut right there just barely backed off, just enough so we can turn this thing off. And once it has enough play, just a little spin off, the whole end, the whole outer tie rod end should just start spinning off. So like I said, leave that jam nut in place for a reference so you know when to stop when you get the new one threaded on. But all we're doing here is just lightly spinning off the old one, just turning it right to the left here. So lefty loosey, righty tighty, same deal with this. And there it is, spun it right off. So there is our inner tie rod, and this thing has the correct amount of play. Doesn't feel bad, doesn't have any excess amount of play, just feels nice and tight and just moves with the motions of me just moving it up and down. So that's good to go. And here is our old ripped outer tie rod end. So there's our old one, guys, fully off and removed. Now let's go ahead and get our new one in. All right, guys, so here is our new outer tie rod end. I went with Moog, so I went with Moog for both the outer tie rods on both sides, and the driver's side part number here is ES801197, and then the passenger is ES801196. So 97 and 96 are the Moog part numbers if you decide to go with the Moog outer tie rod ends, as I did. As you can see, these things match up pretty well. They look good. They have a nice boot, they have a grease fitting, and it comes with a new castle nut, a new cotter pin and washer, and the grease fitting all in the bag with the part. So that's what I went with, Moog outer tie rod ends. Let's go ahead and get this thing installed. All right, so I have our new driver's side outer tie rod in here ready to install. Now, as I mentioned, this does come with a grease fitting, and you do have to thread it in yourself. So I'm just going to go ahead and start it off as I did. And it is a 7 mil. So I have a 7 mil wrench, and I'm just going to lightly tighten this in until it's flush. And then we'll have our grease fitting installed, and then we can actually install this onto the car. So I'm just going to go ahead and lock this grease fitting in, and then we'll go ahead and thread this on. All right, so the grease fitting is installed here on our new outer tie rod end. So now we're going to go ahead and install this thing. So just going to take it right up to the inner tie rod, and we're just going to start threading it on. So just be gentle, and you should just immediately catch, and then you should be able to just start threading this thing on. So
We're going to thread it on right till we get to that jam nut and make sure it's aligned. And that should put us right in about spec of where this should be and where the old one was prior. So that looks good right there. That is perfect. It's right up against the jam nut. So what I'm going to do is just lightly put this into the hole here. Now what I'm going to do is lightly tighten up that jam nut. So I have this by hand tightened up, and what I'm going to do now is count the threads and just make sure I'm in the correct 14 to 15 range as we discussed prior, and then that'll give me an idea of where I'm at. And if we're good, I'll lightly tighten this up, and then we'll go ahead and tighten up the nut to the knuckle on this end. So let's go ahead and count these threads, see where we're at here. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So we're right in that range we need to be. All right, so now what I can do is focus on getting this seated in the knuckle here. Might have to move it a bit. You can move the knuckle now that this isn't connected, so should be able to get this into place. Here, I'm going to put you guys down for a second so I have both hands. It's just going to be easier for me. So make sure that's centered. There we go. All right, so we have that in nice and tight. So now what we can do is go ahead and lightly thread our new castle nut on. So keep in mind there is a washer. With this Moog, they give you a new washer and a new castle nut. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and just start lightly threading this thing in here, or on here I should say. And then that'll give me a nice start point here for this connection. Alright, that's good. And now that I have that lightly tightened, I'm going to come back up to my jam nut. I'm going to tighten this tight as I can with my hand. Alright, so that doesn't have any play really. I got it tight with my hand, and we are going to go back and tighten that. But what we're going to do is go ahead and get this castle nut on here as much as we can. So I'll go ahead and try to get as much as I can with finger threads. We're going to go ahead and turn this a little bit more. And now that I got that pretty tight with my hand, I'm going to lightly hit it with the impact. 19 mil, remember. Alright, so I got it tight. And now what I'm going to do is torque that to spec. Now the torque spec of this 19 mil tie rod end to the knuckle is 25 foot-pounds. So I'm going to lock in my torque wrench to 25 foot-pounds, and we're going to go ahead and torque that 19 mil to spec. All right, guys, 25 foot-pounds here. Got my 19 on my torque wrench. Yep, there it is. All right, so we got our 19 mil torqued in to 25 foot-pounds, and now what we need to do is go ahead and make sure that our castle nut is aligned with the hole on the tie rod end so we can slide our new cotter pin in. So let's take a look at that. All right, so if we're looking dead right here in the center of that castle nut, the hole is actually aligned perfect. So we actually kind of lucked out on this one, and the cotter pin hole aligned with the castle nut right at our torque spec. But if you needed to, you can take a wrench and move that just a hair so you can get the hole to align with the castle nut if need be. All right, guys, so I'm gonna go ahead and slide our cotter pin in here. Should just go right in, I hope. Yeah, we got it. All right, so now that that is in, what we're going to do is bend that around the whole bottom here and get that thing to seat around that whole bottom of the tie rod end. So I'm just taking my crimpers here, get that thing in, and I'm just going to bend this around the bottom. You can even do this with your hand. And there it is. Got the cotter pin in there, nice and secure. So that is now holding in our actual castle nut to the knuckle, and it should never back itself out because we have that cotter pin in there nice and secure. So now that we have this torqued to 25 foot-pounds, our castle nut, we got our cotter pin in. The only thing left here is to secure our jam nut in. All right, so we got everything at the knuckle here on the tie rod end here situated and torqued in. So now we just have to get this jam nut torqued in and locked in. Now if you want, what you could do, and I'm sure the alignment guy would like you, and you might like yourself in the future if you ever have to remove this again, is you can put some anti-seize on the thread. So you can either back this up and put anti-seize, or you can put anti-seize in the tie rod end itself when you turn it on and, you know, get everything turned on to the inner tie rod. You can have anti-seize on it. It'll make it easier for the alignment guy, things like that. So if you want to, you can always put anti-seize on the inner tie rod threads and on the jam nut, just to give it an easier chance to come off next time and to easily get that jam nut loosened up if need be for alignments and things of that nature. So that's one thing you can do. I didn't, but you can if you want. Put anti-seize on any of this to help make it easier to break apart in the future. But what we're going to do is just go ahead and tighten this up. Now that jam nut 22 mil does have a torque spec, and the torque spec is 70 foot-pounds. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and lock it in tight as I can with the 22 mil wrench. And when you go to get alignment after this, that's all they're going to do anyway. Nobody's going to be trying to torque that thing to spec. They're just going to go ahead and get it tight as possible with the wrench once they make their adjustments needed for the alignment. So we're going to go ahead, get our 22, and we'll go ahead and get that thing tightened up as much as we can. All right, so 22 mil, I'm going to be tightening it towards the front of the car. So I'm pulling towards the front this time, not towards the back as I did to loosen it. And that's pretty tight on there, guys. I think I got it. I'm gonna try to give it one more nudge. Yeah. All right, so we got our jam nut locked in right there on our new outer tie rod end. So there we go, guys. This thing is fully installed. No more ripped boot. And there we go. Not too hard. Pretty straightforward job. As long as you got the right tools, this shouldn't be too hard on you. All right, guys, so now that we have both of these fully installed, both passenger and driver, I'm going to go ahead and go to the alignment shop and get this thing spec'd in to make sure that our adjustments are good and that we get everything right. Like I said, we did get new tires, so obviously when you do tie rod ends, you do want to get an alignment after. All right, so everything is tightened up, torqued to spec exactly how it should be. So I hope this helped with doing the outer tie rod ends on your 5th gen Altima. Make sure you stay tuned because you never know when I might be wrenching on this thing again. And until next time, guys.